Hello, everyone, and welcome to another weekly Climate Change Roundtable. This week, we're going to be discussing the growing levels of authoritarianism within the climate change debate. And this is kind of piggybacking off the whole COVID issue. We've been saying that once COVID kind of fades into, well, not obscurity because it's going to be part of our life forever, but as the paranoia and the threat level over COVID start to diminish, climate change is going to be the next big issue that authoritarians use to advance their agenda. So joining me for this conversation today, I have Linnea Lueken, research fellow at the Heartland Institute.
Hello.
All
How
right.
are you guys?
Hey, Linnea. And Sterling Burnett, senior fellow at the Heartland Institute and managing editor for Environment and Climate News. How are you, Sterling?
Good to be back on. And Sterling is a little chilly here in Dallas.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, in Illinois, I don't know how much I feel for you right now. You being just a little chilly.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. But yeah. So, well, first off, I just got a message from our colleague Anthony. He says he'll be here in any moment. So, thank you, Anthony. But all right, let's just get right to it. I mean, we're talking about authoritarianism within the climate change debate. Up here is Anthony. Let me get him.
Hi there.
Hey, Anthony. Glad to have you on the show. Just so you know, we are already live. So, how are you?
I'm used to being live. I've
welcome
spent 35 years being live on television and radio. So, live is where I live.
Live is where you live. You're ready to go. Not even missing a beat. Love it. But yeah. So authoritarianism. I mean, I want to just kind of start off with my first question here, which is, lately it does seem like climate alarmists are increasingly embracing an authoritarian route towards advancing their agenda. What kind of things are they, and like what kind of tools are they using, or what authoritarian methods are they using? And do you all have any comments about how we're seeing more and more of it as time advances?
Well, before we get into the methods, I think we should talk about the why, because they have gotten more bold lately. I mean, is everybody in agreement with that?
They've become more visible, publicly stating their embrace of authoritarianism much more often now. I don't know that they have any methods yet. They keep talking about it. They keep suggesting we should go like China, even though China, as an example of climate purity, is crazy. But it's just that in public places, in speeches, in prominent peer-reviewed publications, they're saying the climate crisis is so great, we've got to get rid of democracy. We're just going to have to force people. Marx talked about forcing people to be free. They're saying we got to force people to take the climate seriously.
Yeah. Their whole methodology is basically our way or the highway. And they've been emboldened by the fact, I think, that they've got control of the House. They've got control of the Senate. They've got, if you can call him this, a president. And so they're like, okay, well, we've got everything, so let's just ram everything down everybody's throats because we're right and you're wrong. That's the viewpoint they have. The left really doesn't care about what anyone who isn't left thinks. Their viewpoint is climate change is a crisis, end of discussion, live with it. And so they're going to just throw all these draconian measures at you. Doesn't matter if they harm the United States. Doesn't matter if they harm individuals. Doesn't matter if they harm the average American family. No. We're right. Climate is a crisis. Shut up and listen and just take your medicine.
Yeah, do what we say. What's funny about this is as they get more and more shrill and more desperate. So they just had their meeting in Glasgow, and the only people embracing authoritarian climate solutions there were democracies. The people that were holdouts in Glasgow were all the authoritarian regimes that said, no, we're going to keep using coal. We're going to keep using fossil fuels. It's good for our economies. But you guys go ahead and impose sharp restrictions on your economies. We're all for it. So it's funny. The authoritarians aren't embracing the climate crisis claims, at least not in their actions. Whereas it's liberal democracies that are saying we've got to give up our freedoms to save the world.
Andy, I think we lost you.
I think it's an interesting I'm back, right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I
thank
think
you.
it's an interesting distinction that you just made, Sterling, and that we're not really talking about authoritarian nations. We're talking about authoritarian actors within our within the United States, within the first world debate. I mean, that's kind of the way that I'm framing this in my head. Would you agree with that characterization or that framing of the issue?
Well, it's people who are calling for nations that aren't authoritarian to become authoritarian because they think that, wrongly, I believe history shows pretty wrongly that if only they are in power and it's sort of absolute power, an iron fist, then we can save the climate because only authoritarianism can do it. Well, yeah. Save the earth from what? From a change, which of course is foolish in and of itself. But I mean, that's what they're calling for. They're not. It's not just that they are authoritarians. It's that they're saying we have to fundamentally change how governments operate in relatively free countries to make them more like the other authoritarian regimes around the globe, to prevent dangerous climate change. And that, well, I think history shows first that authoritarianism is no guarantee. In fact, it's almost a guarantee of environmental destruction. Every every authoritarian country around the globe has worse environmental problems than relatively liberal free democracies. And that environmentalists don't do well in those countries. They're suppressed. They're locked up. They are not likely to be the ones leading the new authoritarian regime that they push so hard for.
Yeah, and this is happening all over the place. It's happening at local levels. I regularly write letters to the editor at my local newspaper, pushing back on a lot of the absolute insanity that some of these people believe. I mean, there are people out there that really think that 10 years from now, we're all going to roast. I mean, they think it's a bigger problem than inflation. They think it's a bigger problem than the economy. They think it's a bigger problem than joblessness. They think that climate change is the end all of our society. They've absolutely been brainwashed. And all of this over a degree or so of temperature rise over the last 100 years. I mean, come on, folks. But the problem is that a lot of these folks don't have cognitive skills to be able to really examine what's happening. They just look at the headline, and the media is complicit in this. And I'm saying to those of you that are listening and watching, you need to push back on this when you can. Write letters to the editor. Call people out on this nonsense, because that's what it is. And yes, climate's changed, but no, it's not a crisis. That we are better fed, better clothed, better educated, better in health, all around as a nation, as well as the world. We've got crop production that's up. We've got poverty that's down. All these things are good. And yet somehow the left has turned all of this into an end of the world style crisis. And it's nowhere near that.
I mean, building on what Anthony said, if you look around the world at the closed countries, authoritarian countries, ask where their lifespan compares to the lifespans in liberal democracies. Ask where their infant mortality is. Ask where their nutrition is and their growth rates. And, by almost any measure that I can think of, liberal democracies are better for the environment. Their environment is of higher quality, cleaner, more pristine, more variety of species, and the people are healthier and wealthier and less fearful. I mean, I don't know what they think when they call for sort of authoritarianism. They can't really believe. I would think. I think what they really think is that it'll be okay because they'll be in the control. And I don't think they reckon with the political actors that, are their supposed allies. I think they will be like the brown shirts. They'll help the revolution occur, but after it's over, they'll be quietly gotten rid of. Robespierre and Trotsky are examples as well of they thought they'd be in control after the revolution, but after it was over, they had to be disposed of because they were in the way of people that were a lot more conniving, dangerous, and politically astute than they were.
Right. The extremists and the activists don't last long after the revolution. You can ask the Mensheviks. I would also like to point out that the COVID situation really worked in their favor as sort of a playbook of all the things that they've been wanting to do forever anyway. And so it's funny how every time any kind of emergency comes along, the solution in their minds is exactly the same. So whether it's COVID or the climate crisis or whatever they want to call it, it's always, always, always don't go out of your homes as much. You need to drive less. You need to travel less. You need to eat less meat. Mm-hmm. They always have the same solutions.
Yep.
But now it's going
return to feudalism. They want us to be serfs.
Now it's going from you need to. That's one thing. To advocate people change their lives on their own. This is what you ought to do, we believe. That's one thing. Now they're saying governments ought to force you to do these things.
Yeah.
It's not enough to exhort people to do it now. We've got to use the force of government, guns, threat of imprisonment. And, they're calling for this. And like I said, public forum, the American, I forget the journal, I think American Political Science Review, or I don't want to get that wrong, but it was a Cambridge publication, published an article where the professor called for forced ending of meat eating. He said, we've got to end free speech. We've got to get rid of democratic regimes. It would be good if we do that. We must. Why? Because the earth is threatened. And he used COVID as an example of what they can get away with. You've got to build on it. Like you say, Linnea, everything is about build back better. It's building on the COVID. Everything is building on the COVID because it showed during this emergency, this perceived emergency, what people were willing to put up with.
Well,
this is the same thing that happened in Nazi Germany when they were going up. They created a series of crises and made the population believe it to justify it. And then they would say, this is for your own good. And so it was like, they're following the same playbook. Now, I'm not equating them to Nazis because that's a whole different animal, but the processes that they're using are similar.
The processes of authoritarianism are almost always similar. That, like this commenter is saying, the Heartland Rasmussen poll, they think also that the government ought to jail people who don't get the COVID vaccine. And we've heard time and time again from popular speakers for the climate agenda that they wish that climate deniers would also be thrown in the clink for causing hurricanes or whatever it is that we do.
They're advocating taking children away from parents who won't get them vaccinated because the state knows best how to raise your child. Well, by the same token, I don't think it's far off before they start calling for parents, children of climate realists or climate skeptics being taken away so they can be put into the camps and indoctrinated, right? No private school can teach differently than the climate, the government sanctioned climate point of view. That same article said, you got to get rid of private property. How do you like that, folks? To fight climate change, you got to seize all the industries and let government, because government does a really good job of managing everything that it's got its hands in. Just ask the people, behind the former Iron Curtain, how government did a great job of stocking the shelves and delivering the food.
Yeah,
and
I'm waiting for the electric
and
Trabant.
managing.
The electric Trabant. Woohoo!
Look, I want my electric power system to work like America's did 20 years ago, not the way it's doing today, as opposed to Cuba's power system or Venezuela's power system, where my wife is from.
It would be nice if the dishwashers got things clean these days. That went too far on authoritarianism. Government
So I did want to ask you, Anthony, kind of a specific question. Just that you run the really popular website whatsupwiththat.com, and I'm just wondering if you have any examples of maybe environmental groups taking authoritarian action against you, trying to take you down, just things that you've dealt with in the past that you would argue is an authoritarian attack on your right to free speech.
Oh, yeah. Literally every day we deal with something of that level. I mean, I've been dealing with these folks since 2006 when I first started the website.
Yeah.
And I have had people call for my assassination in private. We, found some discussions on forums where they would just prefer to have me dead than have me have an opinion. There's people that have called for jailing. There's people that called for the deplatforming of the website. There's people that have called for demonetization of the website. In fact, they've actually succeeded with that. In October of 2017, and I just wrote an article for Environment and Climate News on this about how Google has demonetized climate skeptics. It used to be when you run a website like What's Up With That or Dr. Roy Spencer's website or many others that you could get Google AdWords on these, and it would give you back, a few $100s a month, to supplement that millions of dollars that we're getting in from big oil, that they claim every day. So what they've done is they've basically convinced Google that, climate skeptics are evil and therefore should be demonetized. And Google has sent out notices to virtually every website that discusses climate change in any kind of a way questioning it and saying, nope, we're not going to allow you to run Google AdWords anymore. Now, you think, okay, well, you can go to another advertiser. Well, it's not that simple. If you go to a number of different advertising platforms out there, they're all pretty much linked to Google. Google has a master monopoly on advertising on the internet. And so there's really no place else to go. Now, the amount of money involved that I'm losing and Dr. Roy Spencer's losing and people like Tony Heller are losing is not huge. But it's the fact that the left is using a monopoly as a technology hammer to oppress opposing viewpoints discussed in rational ways is very, very troubling. And, now that they've done this, where are they going to stop? Are they going to say, well, you're not allowed to have any money. We're going to go take your bank account because your thoughts are evil. I mean, seriously, they might come to that. That's the kind of thinking these folks have. They genuinely believe that because we have an alternate opinion and because we dare to discuss it in a scientific, factual way, that we are hurting the planet somehow.
Well, now it is, it may be just a little bit of money to some people, but for someone like John Stossel, it's a lot of money when you can no longer view his videos. And he has been punished, and he's a journalist. He just basically puts it out there for people to debate. And when they demonetized him, when Facebook went after him, their fact checkers had to admit he hadn't gotten any facts wrong.
Yeah.
It wasn't a matter of fact. It was, they said, we didn't think the appropriate context and that the facts you use were misleading. Facts aren't misleading. They just are. So there was a dispute as to what he should have been saying, but not a dispute over the facts of what he said. And he was still almost deplatformed, but certainly demonetized to a large degree. And this is becoming more common. It is dangerous. And like Anthony says, where will it stop? Look, it's already happening. It's soon to happen in banking, and it's soon to happen in your retirement. The Biden administration is pushing this ESG where every fund must deal with climate change, must address climate change. And if they don't address it enough, the banking regulators will come after them. And if businesses don't do what the government says, the regulators will come after them. The stock exchange will kick them off. And will they go after individual bank accounts of individual people? I don't know. But our banks are more than happy to say, oh, we're jumping on the climate change bandwagon too, because we don't want to get in trouble, or we think we can make a profit off of it. And you don't have a choice with your bank account whether they use your money other than to take it out and stick it in a mattress, right?
I think that the next thing that's going to happen is they're going to go after your choices, personal choices. For example, Andrew, do you have that graphic up? There it is. So here's the article I wrote about Google demonetizes climate skepticism. And I urge everyone to go to heartland.org and read this, because it gives you a window into what's happening now with the kind of things that they're doing, just simply talking about climate on the internet. But I think they're going to go even further. I think the left is just absolutely crazed with this idea that we're going to go extinct. And they're going to take it to the level of starting to limit what you can eat. They're already out there trying to tell you that you shouldn't be eating beef. They came up with a meatless Mondays concept, and they're pushing that. They're going to start pushing that in schools. Just watch. But they're also going to start, I'll bet, trying to influence things like labels. Now, they've already done this in California with automobiles, for example. Back in 2006, when they implemented AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act, they came up with this idea that cars need to be labeled with a global warming impact index on a 1 to 10 scale. And so anytime you buy a car in California, you have this number that's listed on it as how much impact it has. Just watch. They're going to come after food next. They're going to come after food, and they're going to say, well, this bag of popcorn has a global warming index of, 8.2 or something like that, or, this burger that you're buying from Wendy's has a global warming index of 10. Oh my God, it's 10. It's going to kill the planet. You should put that down right now. That's what they're going to do next. Just watch.
I'd believe it. Anyone have any comments on that? All right.
Well,
moving
Oh,
forward.
wait, no, sorry, I did. I had to.
Oh yeah, go for it.
I was tapping on my keyboard, so I muted myself for a second. But if you look, I posted a link about a meat tax that the European Union is thinking about. I guess taxing meat will stop the weather from being bad. It's one of the things, and they do weird things in popular media, like in The Guardian and some of those fluffier, Huffington Post, those kinds of sources, Vox too, where they talk a disturbing amount about how we should be eating bugs more.
Yes.
I don't know if you've noticed
good.
that one.
My ancestors, evolved for thousands of years, and came up with developed opposable thumbs and language skills, so they could communicate during hunting as a group, so they wouldn't have to eat bugs. Once again, this is not a back to the future. This is a back to the past. They want us to live these simpler lifestyles where we've foregone the modern agricultural system. Eat only wild plants, give up modern farming, get rid of, or I don't know what's going to happen to these animals that we have engineered over the years through crossbreeding and because they can't survive in the wild. I'm sorry. In Texas, Herefords are going to die if you don't get them in during a freeze, and they do. That's why we have barns. They're not the same critters that they were during the Ice Age, and they just don't care. But I want to disagree with Anthony on one thing. He says these guys are really afraid of the end of the world. There are some of them that are, but I think they're a rump. What they really want, it's really about power.
Yeah.
They really are afraid that they don't have power, and they're using the climate scare, they're allying with people who are really afraid. But like I said, I think the knives will come out if they ever get power, and those people that were really afraid, that's like, forget you, and it goes into their back, and they take power, because what it's really about for them is power. They really don't like it that they're not in control of everything. And I think they really believe that they know best how everyone else ought to live.
Yeah. So we're running low. If anyone has anything else on that topic, just jump in now.
Yeah, just that I have long suspected that the people who are loud advocates for the kind of green agenda and the climate scare stuff really don't believe what they're saying. They're kind of cynics about it. And you can tell just by the way that they live their lives, right? Like these guys are jet setting everywhere. So they don't really believe what they're saying, but they're scaring like school kids to death about this. I mean, there have been studies that have come out showing that little kids are actively afraid that the world is going to end. And that, you know, and that's
to grow up.
That's all
They're
childhood
creating
as far as
mental
I'm
health
concerned.
problems
I
among
agree with you,
youth.
Anthony.
However, when the youth get a little bit older than being children, you know, first through third or fourth grade, whenever you want to say, when they get their first cell phone, I don't know when that is for most parents. But I have a feeling they're less afraid once they get their first cell phone, because if what a parent would say is, okay, you're right, we've got to make some sacrifices here to save the world. We're going to take away your cell phone or your Kindle or whatever device you have. Suddenly they would be less afraid of the world ending tomorrow if they couldn't play their games or text or whatever, because the electricity they're using to charge those things is not climate friendly.
Yeah, I wonder what the age is of development when you develop a bullshit detector.
I think
for some people it's pretty
young.
early on.
Yeah, pretty young.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, as soon as you figure out that this joke isn't actually taking your nose, I think that's about when you figure that one out.
So the last one I wanted to cover here is what are some of the more subversive tactics alarmists use to advance their agenda? So we've talked about how they are doing it, but maybe just kind of briefly touch on the methodology of how they're doing it.
Guilt is number one.
Guilt? That's actually an answer that I never would have considered, that I think is a great answer. Right.
Well, also, you know, on the policy side, they try and pack in their authoritarianism into nice sounding bills, into, we have a crisis that we're going to solve with Build Back Better. And it just happens to have some authoritarian things in it, telling people how to live, telling them where they'll get their electricity, telling them this, that, and the other. But it's all building back better, you know. COVID relief. Oh, we're going to be relieved from COVID. And it just happens to have all sorts of subsidies for green energy. Yeah. What does that have to do with COVID relief? Nothing whatsoever. So, I mean, that's how they do it, is they label bills, even maybe some of the best intentioned bills. By the time all the horse trading goes on, they're packed with so many things that have nothing whatsoever to do with whatever the title of the bill is. And many of these things are sort of, you know, the slippery slope down authoritarianism.
Yeah. Anyone else? No. I mean, just briefly, to throw a few things out there. They use the Endangered Species Act to prevent, building lands in certain areas. Sterling, I know you've done a lot of research with that. Linnea, I know you have too. Let's see. And more Anthony, you can speak to this. They use faulty data at times to show that the crisis is to show that there is a crisis when there is no crisis.
Yeah. I would like to point out something about data that most people don't understand.
Yes.
All climate data, no matter where it's from, who does it, what political side of the spectrum it's from, it's a fabrication. Now, and not a fabrication in the sense of something being false. I should say maybe it's a construct rather than a fabrication. Climate, and a trend of climate, is a construct of the average temperature daily averaged over 30 years. It's a mathematical construct.
Yeah.
It's not something that you can measure every day. So climate is a mathematical construct. It's an abstract. And they use that abstract in a way to make you feel afraid or guilty or panicked or whatever. And the downside of a construct like that is, because it is a construct, you can change the way you construct the results. And that's what happens with a lot of climate data. And they come up with these rationalizations where they try to cool the past, because they say, well, the data measuring techniques were faulty back then. And they will also disappear data. One of the classic examples is what happened with wildfire data in the United States. We had wildfire data going all the way back to the 1930s. And this had been up on the website for the National Interagency Fire Center for over a decade. No one had any problems with it. But then when climate skeptics started pointing out that the number of fires in the United States, wildfires, controlled burns, the whole thing, was far more in the past than it was today, they suddenly decided, oh, that data is no good. We got to get rid of it. And so they decided that we're only going to show you the data from 1983. From 1983 onward. And it just so happens that 1983 was the lowest point in the record for the United States. And therefore, the trend could only go up from 1983. And then they can say, well, look, see, it's getting worse. Climate change. It's a lie.
Yeah, the temperature data, they've done the same with the temperature data. And it's, you mentioned Endangered Species Act. It was used to control property rights. Not just the climate alarm movement. It's not just climate activists. The environmental movement itself was spawned by leadership who were largely authoritarian in nature. It goes back to the progressive era when they the first sort of environmental ethic of conservation. People like Teddy Roosevelt, Pinchot, the first head of the Forest Service, which was his friend, and others in his administration or his rump cabinet, they didn't think average folks knew well how to manage natural resources, and we had to take it away from them. We couldn't, we don't like this homestead and stuff. We got to take land back because we know what we need is a scientific elite. And that was their term, scientific elite.
Yeah.
Trained to manage resources, to control all these resources because the markets couldn't be trusted and politicians couldn't be trusted. It needed to be run by a bureaucracy that was outside of politics because politics is a messy thing. People might not agree. And this should be managed by scientists. And so, this has been around since the environmental movement in America first arose. And President Dwight Eisenhower warned of this. Everyone remembers his address, his farewell address, where he said he warned of the military industrial complex. The second half of that address warned of the scientific elite and industrial complex taking over as government funds more and more science. Scientists will become beholden to government and not the seeking of the truth.
And boy, have we seen that with COVID, right? Like the idea that our public policy is entirely controlled by unelected bureaucrats within the health system is absurd.
Yeah, agreed.
And the Fauci worship is quite a bit.
The CDC, the OMB, they all know best how you should live.
And they would absolutely love for the EPA and the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, to operate in much of the same way that the CDC does, where they can, at times issue guidance that you're not allowed to leave your house for weeks at a time, or you're not allowed to drive your car because it's not Tuesday. So today's not your car drive day.
Rather than having to go through, rather than having to have that public comment period on these rules.
Yeah.
Just get rid of that. We don't need the public input.
That crazy stuff.
They don't know stuff. Yeah.
What's a republic?
Unless anyone has any final points, we are hitting the 30-minute mark here, which is around when we wrap it up. Anyone got any last things to say? Nope.
Be afraid. Right. Be very afraid. Be climate authoritarian.
Be afraid of the climate, or be afraid of the climate alarmists.
The climate itself.
Climate authoritarians.
How many people have raised your hand if you've been killed by climate? Yeah, right. But climate authoritarianism is killing people. It really is.
I agree with. All right. Well, thank you all for joining this broadcast again. We are actually doing them every Friday now. Go to climaterealism.com. You can see it there on the bottom of your screen. Sometimes I try to point at things on screen. It's almost impossible. I'm going to stop trying to do that. Outside of that, Linnea, Anthony, Sterling, you want to say goodbye to the good people?
All right.
Thanks for showing up. I hope you find this informative.
Does anyone have anything to plug real quick? Sterling, Anthony, Linnea?
Well, Climate Realism and Heartland Daily News.
All right.
And Climate at a Glance, and Climate at a Glance, and Climate Change Weekly.
Yep. All right. And with that, we will see you all next time.